in which an affair unfolds, and we see the damage wrought upon the scorned. Chapter 16. On the way home, Levine asked for all the details of Kitty's illness and the Sherbatskys' plans, and though he would have been ashamed to admit it, what he learned was pleasing to him. Pleasing because there was still hope, and all the more pleasing because she, who had made him suffer so much, was suffering herself. But when Stepan Arkadyevitch began to speak of the causes of Kitty's illness and mentioned Vronsky's name, Levine interrupted him. "I have no right to know family details, and to tell the truth, I'm also not interested." Stepan Arkadyevitch smiled, barely perceptibly, catching one of those instantaneous changes so familiar to him in Levine's face, which became as gloomy as it had been cheerful a moment before. "You've already quite settled with Robinin about the wood?" asked Levine. "Yes, I have. An excellent price, 38,000. 8 down and the rest over 6 years. I was busy with it for a long time. No one offered more." "That means you gave your wood away," Levine said gloomily. "Why is that?" Stepan Arkadyevitch asked with a good-natured smile, knowing that Levine would now find everything bad. "Because that wood is worth at least 200 rubles an acre," Levine replied. "Ah, these country squires," said Stepan Arkadyevitch jokingly. "This tone of scorn for city people, yet when it comes to business we always do better. Believe me, I worked it all out," he said, "and the wood has been sold very profitably. I'm even afraid he'll go back on it. You see, it's mostly second growth," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, wishing with the word second growth to convince Levine completely of the unfairness of his doubts. "Fit only for stove wood. It won't stand you more than 10 cord per acre, and he's given me 75 rubles. Levine smiled scornfully. "I know that manner," he thought. "Not just his, but all city people's, who come to the country twice in 10 years, pick up 2 or 3 country words, and use them, rightly or wrongly, in the firm conviction that they know everything. Second growth. Stand you 10 cord. He says the words, but doesn't understand a thing himself." "I wouldn't teach you about what you write up there in your office," he said. "And if necessary, I'd ask you. But you are so certain you understand this whole business of selling the wood. It's hard. Did you count the trees?" "How can I count the trees?" Stepan Arkadyevitch said with a laugh, still wishing to get his friend out of his bad mood. "To count the sands, the planet's rays, a lofty mind well may." "Well, yes, and Ryabinin's lofty mind can, and no merchant will buy without counting, unless it's given away to him, as you're doing. I know your wood. I go hunting there every year, and your wood is worth 200 rubles an acre, outright, and he's giving you 75 in installments. That means you've made a gift of 30,000. "Come, don't get so carried away," said Stepan Arkadyevitch pitifully. "Why didn't anyone make an offer?" "Because he's in with the other merchants. He paid them off. I've dealt with them all. I know them. They're not merchants. They're speculators. He wouldn't touch a deal where he'd make 10 or 15%. He waits till he gets a ruble for 20 kopecks. Come now, you're out of sorts. Not in the least, Levine said gloomily as they drove up to the house. A little gig was already standing by the porch, tightly bound in iron and leather, with a sleek horse tightly harnessed in broad tugs. In the little gig, tightly filled with blood and tightly girdled, sat Ryabinin's clerk, who was also his driver. Ryabinin himself was in the house and met the friends in the front room. He was a tall, lean, middle-aged man with a mustache, a jutting, clean-shaven chin, and protruding, dull eyes. He was dressed in a long-skirted dark blue frock coat, with buttons below his rear and high boots wrinkled at the ankles and straight on the calves, over which he wore big galoshes. He wiped his face in a circular motion with a handkerchief, and, straightening his frock coat, which sat well enough to begin with, greeted the entering men with a smile, holding his hand out to Stepan Arkadyevitch, as if trying to catch something. "So you've come," Stepan Arkadyevitch gave him his hand. "Splendid. I dared not disobey your Highness' commands, though the road's much too bad. I positively walked all the way, but I got here in time. My respects, Konstantin Dmitritch." He turned to Levine, trying to catch his hand as well, but Levine, frowning, pretended not to notice and began taking out the woodcock. "Had a good time hunting. What bird might that be?" Ryabinin added, looking with scorn at the woodcock. "Must have taste to it," and he shook his head disapprovingly, as if doubting very much that the hide was worth the tanning. "Want to go to my study," Levine, frowning gloomily, said to Stepan Arkadyevitch in French. "Go to my study. You can talk there." "That we can, or wherever you like, sir," Ryabinin said with scornful dignity, as if wishing to make it felt that others might have difficulties in dealing with people, but for him there could never be any difficulties in anything. Going into the study, Ryabinin looked around by habit, as if searching for an icon, but when he found one, he did not cross himself. He looked over the bookcases and shelves, and, with the same doubt as about the woodcock, smiled scornfully, and shook his head disapprovingly, refusing to admit that this hide could be worth the tanning. "Well, have you brought the money?" Oblonsky asked. "Sit down. The money won't hold us up. I've come to see you, to have a talk." "And talk about what? Do sit down." "That I will," said Ryabinin, sitting down and leaning his elbow on the back of the chair in a most painful way for himself. "You must come down a little, Prince. It's sinful otherwise, and the money's all ready, to the last kopeck. Money won't ever hold things up." Levine, who meanwhile had put his gun away in a cupboard, was going out of the door, but hearing the merchant's words, he stopped. "You got the wood for nothing as it is," he said. "He was too late coming here, otherwise I'd have set the price." Ryabinin rose and with a smile silently looked up at Levine from below. "Konstantin Dmitritch is very stingy," he said with a smile, turning to Stepan Arkadyevitch. "There's finally no dealing with him. I wanted to buy wheat, offered good money. Why should I give you what's mine for nothing? I didn't steal it or find it lying around. Good gracious, nowadays stealing's positively impossible. Everything nowadays is finally in the open courts. Everything's noble today. There's no more of that stealing. We talked honest. He asked too much for the wood. It doesn't tally. I beg you to come down at least a little." "But have you concluded the deal, or not? If you have, there's no point in bargaining." "If you haven't," said Levine, "I'll buy the wood myself." The smile suddenly vanished from Ryabinin's face. A hawk-like, predatory and hard expression settled on it. With quick, bony fingers he undid his frock coat, revealing a shirt not tucked in, a brass-buttoned waistcoat and a watch-chain, and quickly took out a fat old pocket-book. "If you please, the wood is mine," he said, quickly crossing himself and holding out his hand. "Take the money, The wood is mine. That's how Rabbanan buys, without counting pennies, he went on, frowning and brandishing the pocketbook. I wouldn't be in a hurry if I were you, said Levine. Gracious, Oblonsky said in surprise. I've given him my word. Levine left the room, slamming the door. Ryabinin, looking at the door, shook his head with a smile. It's all an account of youth, nothing but childishness, finally. I'm buying it, trust my honor, just for the glory alone, meaning that it was Ryabinin and nobody else who bought a grove from Oblonsky. And God granted tallies up. Trust in God. If you please, sir, write me out a receipt. An hour later, the merchant, neatly closing his robe and fastening the books of his frock coat, the receipt in his pocket, got into his tightly bound little gig and drove home. Ah, these gentlemen, he said to his clerk, all the same subject. That's so, the clerk replied, handing him the reins and fastening the leather apron. So it's congratulations, Mikhail Ignatitch? Well, well. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.